moves that, in the opinion of the House, the government should recognize the important contributions Canadian Portuguese have made to building Canada and to Canadian society in general, the cultural diversity of the Portuguese communities in Canada, and the importance of educating and reflecting upon Portuguese heritage and culture for future generations by declaring June 10th as Portugal Day and the month of June as Portuguese Heritage Month. Debate. The honourable member for Davenport.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is with enormous pride and privilege that I rise in this venerable House to support my private member's bill, M-126, celebrating the contributions of Portuguese Canadians to this great nation. My riding of Davenport is blessed to have the largest Portuguese community in Canada. I truly believe that Canada and Canadian society is enriched by Portuguese culture, traditions, history, and language. C'est pour moi un grand...
It's with great pride and privilege that I rise in this venerable institution to speak in favor of my private member's bill, M-126, which celebrates the contributions of Portuguese Canadians to this great country.
Any discussion on settler community in Canada cannot start without first acknowledging and thanking the traditional stewards of this land. We are grateful to the Indigenous peoples as we are gathered here today on the traditional unceded lands of the Algonquin people. It is a pleasure to be back in the House this week with all my colleagues, and I want to thank members from all parties for supporting my motion. I'd like to thank the Minister of Heritage, my Liberal colleagues, and especially the members of the Canada-Portugal Parliamentary Friendship Group for all their encouragement and support. And of course, I'd like to thank my staff for their hard work over the last few months and days. It is also important to mention that the Province of Ontario, City of Toronto, and the Public and Catholic School Boards of Ontario all took the lead in recognizing June as Portugal Heritage Month and/or June 10th as Portugal Day in their respective jurisdictions. I am building on their great initiative and accomplishments, and I want to thank them for their leadership. Finally, I'd like to thank all the Portuguese leaders, Portuguese clubs, associations, and the Portuguese media in my riding of Davenport and across the country that have tirelessly promoted the Portuguese culture, language, and community, and who serve as an inspiration for this private member's bill. It is an honor. It is to honor them and their aspiration for the Portuguese to be recognized at the highest level of our nation and be celebrated for its many contributions to Canada, and equally to set the stage for the preservation and promotion of the Portuguese language, traditions, culture, and for many decades and centuries to come. Finalmente, gostava de agradecer a todos os líderes portugueses, clubes e associações, e também a mídia no meu círculo da Davenport e através do Canadá, que continuamente, sem parar, tem promovido a cultura, a língua e a comunidade e que servem de inspiração para esta Private Members Bill, no sentido de honrá-los e também as suas aspirações do modo a serem reconhecidos ao mais alto nível da nossa nação pelas suas imensas contribuições para o Canadá e, igualmente, criar uma plataforma para a preservação e promoção da língua portuguesa, tradições e cultura para muitas décadas e séculos vindouros. Madam Speaker, there's approximately 16 million Portuguese around the world, from those who live in Portugal, including the Azores and Madeiran Islands, and other parts of the Americas, Europe, India, and Africa. But when we consider Portuguese-speaking people, that number jumps from 60 million to 220 million. Indeed, the Portuguese language evolved from Latin and became a compulsory language in Portugal under King Dom Dinis in the 14th century. For the following 2 centuries, the 15th and 16th century, the Portuguese were known global explorers, such as Vasco da Gama, who discovered far-off lands that at the time were unidentified, and who discovered in 1497 the first ocean route between India from Europe, connecting for the first time ever the Atlantic and the Indian Oceans. There's also Fernão de Margalhães, born in the northern part of Portugal, who in 1519 led the very first expedition by ship that circumnavigated the world. Poet Luís Vaz de Camões wrote the epic poem Os Lusíadas that interprets this exciting age of exploration and discovery of the Portuguese. Camões is known as Portugal's greatest poet, and indeed the day of his death, June 10, is celebrated as Portugal's National Day. Madam Speaker, it is also around this time period, the 15th and 16th centuries, that the Portuguese were first identified as coming to the shores of Canada to fish off the coast of Newfoundland. And in subsequent centuries, there were a number of Portuguese explorers that made their way to Canada. There's two great stories I want to share. The first is the story of Pedro da Silva, Canada's first official letter carrier, who on behalf of New France delivered parcels and letters between Montreal and Quebec beginning in 1705. And then there's Portuguese Joe Silva, born in Pico Azores. Portuguese Joe came to Canada in 1860 via whaling schooner and decided to stay, trying his hand at gold mining. He married an Indigenous woman from the Coast Salish Nation, became one of the founders of Vancouver's guest town, had 11 children, with many of his descendants still populating the BC coast today. A monument just last year was erected to honor him in Stanley Park, and it honors the link between the Portuguese and Coast Salish First Nations cultures, marking the land's rich heritage and symbolizing unity for Vancouver's present-day diverse inhabitants. I love this wonderful connection between the Portuguese and Canada's First Nations. Madam Speaker, the first official group to come from Portugal in terms of immigrants arrived in Pier 21, Nova Scotia, in May 1953, and they came aboard a boat called the Saturnia steamship. 3 to 4 more full boatloads came the year after, and throughout the 1960s and 70s, thousands of Portuguese immigrated to Canada to escape the poverty they experienced under the dictatorship of António de Oliveira Salazar, considered the most oppressive and longest-serving dictatorship of Western Europe. Many also left to flee the Portuguese colonial war, Portugal's war against the nationalist movements in Portugal's African colonies. In the early 1970s, our then Prime Minister, Pierre Trudeau, introduced a policy of multiculturalism, the first country in the world to adopt such a policy. And it was this policy that paved the way in the early 1970s for Canada to create a pathway to citizenship for many of the tens of thousands of Portuguese who to this day are still forever grateful to have been given a chance to start a new life in a country that has given them their freedom without having to give up their language, culture, traditions, and identity. Indeed, now, over 40 years later, the Portuguese are 500,000 strong, which includes up to their 4th generation. And while their population largest in Ontario and Quebec, they have vibrant communities right across this great land, from the west coast in BC right to the east coast in Nova Scotia. Madam Speaker, you'll also be very happy to know that many universities across the country now offer Portuguese studies, from University of British Columbia, University of Winnipeg, York University, University of Brock, University of Toronto, and University of Montreal. Indeed, the University of Toronto celebrated 70 years of Portuguese instruction, and I want, just this year, and I want to thank and acknowledge university academics right across this country, including Manuela Marujo, Inês Cardoso, Maria João Dodman, and Carlos Teixeira for their tireless efforts to promote Portuguese studies in Canada. And more locally in my riding, the first Portuguese Canadian Cultural Centre has been teaching the Portuguese language since 1956. And I want to give a shout out to Celina de Mello, the current principal, for her tireless years of service to the school. Today, it is gratifying to see Portuguese taught in schools right across the country. There's over 16 jurisdictions in Ontario, and there are a number of public schools right across the country, from BC through to Manitoba through to Nova Scotia. And finally, I want to recognize the heroic work of Portuguese clubs right across the country. They work tirelessly to provide a space for their members to come together, to practice their language, to celebrate their culture and traditions. There are over 150 clubs in Canada, and more than 20 in my riding of Davenport alone, and I wish I had the time to mention each one of them, because boy, do they work hard, and they so deserve the recognition. I want to thank each CASA. I want to thank each organization, each leader, each board member, and all tireless volunteers for all they do to keep their clubs active and relevant. And it won't come as a surprise, Madam Speaker, that so many Portuguese groups do a lot of fundraising to raise money for different initiatives in the community. Two of my colleagues, the MP from Brampton South and the MP from Brampton West, told me of their great pride of the Amigos Portugueses do Pio Memorial for their extraordinary fundraising efforts for the Osler Foundation and for the Pio Memorial Center for Integrated Health and Wellness. And I know that my Mississauga colleagues would tell me that they're so proud of the Luso-Canadian Charitable Society, headed by Jack Prazeres, that supports families and adults living with developmental and physical disabilities. And of course, I have to give a shout out to the many female Luso groups such as the Amigos de Toronto, raising money for cancer research and support. And of course, you can't talk about Portuguese clubs in Canada without mentioning a couple. The Alliance of Portuguese Clubs and Associations of Ontario do such an extraordinary job of bringing all the clubs together and doing the most ambitious programming for Portugal Week, and organizes the largest street festival in Toronto, second largest street festival in Toronto. I want to acknowledge José Maria Eustáquio for his leadership and the leadership of their board and volunteers. Madam Speaker, the Portuguese are highly established and very integrated into the Canadian diaspora. Many of the Portuguese when they arrived in Canada, took construction and cleaning jobs. These honorable jobs helped hardworking Portuguese to support their families, buy homes, and contribute to their church and community. The Portuguese also raised citizens and leaders who currently serve in important roles and who are an inspiration to all Canadians. We know of many of them today. There are two in this House. We have the MP for Brossard, Stephen Lambert, and we have the MP for Mississauga East Cooksville. We have two provincial finance ministers, the Honourable Charles Souza and the Honourable Carlos Letao. We have a provincial member of Parliament, Cristina Martins, and we've got wonderful municipal leaders in Ana Bailau in Toronto, Frank Montero of Cambridge, Marta Medeiros of Brampton, and Nelson Santos in Kingsville. And the Portuguese even have their own Portuguese Walk of Fame, created in 2013 by Toronto-based community leader Manuel da Costa, to recognize Portuguese Canadians in all fields for their outstanding achievements to our country. From cleaners and construction workers that have built much of the infrastructure in Toronto and Ontario, a very successful professional class of talent has emerged. The Portuguese business community is super active. A group called the Federation of Portuguese Canadian Business Professionals was created to promote business activities, leadership, and Portuguese culture. This group has inspired an impressive list of civic leaders, including two of its founders, Armindo Silva and Fernando Costa, to businessmen such as Joe Pinto, Luís Luoro Jr. And I've no doubt, under the current leadership of Michelle George, the Federation will play an integral role in building stronger economic ties to Portugal through the Canada-Europe Trade Agreement, which was just ratified today by the Portuguese Parliament, Mr. Speaker, and which comes into force tomorrow. And I can't mention groups in Canada without mentioning the fact that I have a very strong building trades union and construction unions in my riding. There is no Portuguese event, there's no Portuguese fundraiser that is not supported by LAUNA 180, Local 183 and Local 506. And I want to thank Jack Prazeres, the business manager, for his extraordinary leadership. Mr. Speaker, our Prime Minister never tires of saying that diversity is strength, and one can be a proud Portuguese and a proud Canadian, and there is no conflict. Indeed, the Portuguese Canadians has shared much of their culture with us, including their fado music, their great love of football, whether you're a Benfica, Porto, or Sporting FC fan, their amazing cuisine, whether it's the bacalhau or the churrasqueras or their queijos, their amazing pastel de natas, and their amazing world-class wines from Douro, Alentejo, or Douro regions. And their Portuguese media is like no other I've ever seen. They are unbelievably strong for a community of its size, particularly in both Montreal and Toronto. And I'd like to give a huge shout out to Sou Português, Antonio Perino, Correio de Manhã, Eduardo Vieira, ABC, Fernando Cruz Gomes, and O Millennium. We also have wonderful TV programs with Omni, Gente TV, Sergio Morato, Nelly Pedro, and of course, Portuguese radio that was created by Frank Alvarez in Serve. This motion to enshrine June as Portugal Heritage Month and to designate June 10th as Portugal Day in Canada is important not just for the obvious reason of ensuring we recognize the contributions of the Portuguese to Canada at the national level, and not just to promote the cultural language in the years to come, but because by doing so we also reinforce and promote our Canadian values and serve as a model to the world. This is especially important at a time when there's increasing racism and anti-immigration sentiment in too many countries globally. It's much easier to see our differences than our similarities. In Motion 126, we remind ourselves that we are stronger because of our differences and not in spite of them. And Canada is the light and model for the world for showcasing that diversity is a strength. The Portuguese have always been a people open to the world, a people who came to Canada and have successfully integrated into Canadian society, achieving great things and setting an example for the leaders of today and tomorrow. I've no doubt that the Portuguese from every part of Canada will continue to play a key role in creating a better Canada. It is an absolute honor to be able to present M-126 today, celebrating the contributions of Portuguese Canadians to this great nation. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to do so.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to my friend, the Honourable Member for Davenport, muito obrigada. We're very pleased to see this bill come forward. I'm happy to second it. And I wanted to let her know that the story of Portuguese Joe is one I know well. Joe Silva is very well known throughout coastal British Columbia. And his life did take a very unhappy turn. At one point, he left Stanley Park, and where he'd been so successful there, one of the early founders of Gastown. But in his last days, he lived in my area on the Salish Sea on an island called Reed Island, just off Galiano. So there's a lot of Portuguese heritage that stretches to both coasts. A lot of the Portuguese explorers and colonizers were the first to reach Cape Breton. And it's a lot of the place names around Cape Breton Island, where I'm from, were also originally Portuguese. So I want to thank her for this initiative, and I certainly, in terms of a question, only can ask, what can we do to help?
The Honourable Member for Davenport.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for her wonderful remark. You know, I actually really love this particular story of Portuguese Joe, and I love it because I love that there's this connection between the Portuguese community and our First Peoples of this country. And I also love the statue. If you actually seen, I've actually seen pictures. I haven't been blessed to actually see it, but I know that it's a very beautiful statue, and it actually has Portuguese tile that actually comes from the Azores that actually surrounds it. So it's a very specific, it's a very special story and history in Canada. In terms of supporting, I think that for me, you know, having this motion pass in the House, I think is very important, and continuing to encourage the Portuguese culture, to support the Portuguese communities in every community across this country, I think is one of the ways that all of us can support the diversity of this great nation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments. The Honourable Member for London, the West, yes, of course.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my honourable colleague for coming with this private member's bill, and I know that you have much support within this House, no doubt. I did want to mention that one of my favorite restaurants in my hometown of London is Portuguese. And I can honestly say that I think one of our other colleagues across the floor, it is in actually her riding, and I would think she would agree with me that King of the Pigs is quite possibly the best restaurant around.
It's a good restaurant.
But it does sound good, doesn't it? Anyway, I do want to thank you, because I think the Portuguese community of London will be very happy that we're supporting this, and I truly hope that everyone will be on board. And I just want to make sure that others have a chance to appreciate the Portuguese culture. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Davenport.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for her wonderful comment. And indeed, I probably could have spent 15 minutes just talking about Portuguese food, because the porchetta sandwiches are actually very, very popular. So those tend to be the pork sandwiches that are very famous within the Portuguese community. And I just returned from a month in Portugal, and so I was very blessed to taste a lot of their fresh fish, a lot of their bacalaos, which I did not mention. Codfish is actually very, very popular and something that's also been introduced to the Canadian culture. And again, the cajous, which are the cheeses, is also something that I think is very popular within Canada. And I have no doubt, actually, with the Canada-Europe Trade Agreement going into effect as of tomorrow, that we'll actually be able to experience even more Portuguese food within Canada very shortly. Thanks so much, Mr. Speaker.
Obrigado. Resuming debate, the honourable member for Haldimand-Norfolk.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And before I begin today, I'd like to share a quote with my colleagues that I came across while preparing for this speech. Now, it's a quote from Summer Sanders. And I quote, "To be a champion, I think that you have to see the big picture. It's not about winning and losing. It's about everyday hard work, about thriving on a challenge. It's about embracing the pain that you'll experience at the end of the race and not being afraid." And Mr. Speaker, as Canadians, we're not shy when it comes to hard work and facing challenges. Particularly in my beautiful riding of Haldimand-Norfolk, we're not afraid to roll up our sleeves and get the job done. And when I think of my Portuguese friends at home, these are the traits that personify them completely. Mr. Speaker, today I rise to pay tribute to the Portuguese community within my beautiful riding of Haldimand-Norfolk on the south shore of Lake Erie, south coast, north shore. And I do so by sharing my thoughts on them and on M-126. Now, I know that this is the first time that this motion has been debated in the House, so for my colleagues who aren't aware of what this motion proposes to do, let me explain briefly. M-126 was put forward by the member for Davenport and calls on the government to recognize the contributions made by the Portuguese community to building Canada and their contributions to Canadian society in general. Now, as a way of educating and reflecting on Portuguese heritage and culture for future generations, this motion proposes that June be declared Portuguese Heritage Month and that June 10th be claimed as Portugal Day. And before I go into why I'm standing to support this motion today, please let me first share with the House a brief history about why this month and this day are important to the Portuguese community. Every 10th of June, the Portuguese celebrate their national holiday known as Dia de Portugal, or Portugal Day as it is known to the rest of the world. And while many Portuguese Canadians currently celebrate Portugal Day, this motion will solidify this day as a recognized cultural day right across Canada. The state commemorates the death of Luís de Camões, a significant figure in the history of Portugal. De Camões is best known for his work on Lusíadas, the national epic poem of Portugal that celebrates the nation's successes and its rich history. De Camões was known to be an adventurer. His many escapades include surviving a shipwreck in the region of Cochinchina, now known as Vietnam, and losing an eye while in battle in Ceuta. Legend has it that in order to save the Lusíadas, Camões had to keep it afloat with one of his hands, while he used his other arm to swim through the unforgiving waters of the region's seas. Patriotism and bravery are just a few of the qualities that Camões had that made the nation choose to honor him in celebrating Portugal Day. Camões and his perseverance through his adventures is a direct representative of the Portuguese people in my area. Their ability to see a challenge and overcome that challenge is, quite frankly, inspirational. And I can't think of a better way to honor them than by showing our support for this day and for this motion. Now, for me to explain further why this motion is important to people where I live, I need to share with this House a little bit of background on my beautiful riding of Haldimand-Norfolk and the wonderful, wonderful people who live there. Now, there's no doubt that Canada is a diverse country. Many people come from all over the world to live here, and that's something that should make us all proud. I do not, Mr. Speaker, have the largest Portuguese population, not in my riding, but especially when it's compared with ridings like those of the member from Davenport. In fact, Haldimand-Norfolk is made up largely of people from countries such as Britain, Ireland, Scotland, Germany, Belgium, Poland, the Netherlands, and Hungary. The Portuguese people make up just shy of 3% of the population throughout Haldimand-Norfolk, according to the latest census records. Now that's just over 3,000 people. Now that may not seem like a lot to you, Mr. Speaker, but 3,000 people is the total population of many of the smaller communities in my riding, if you were to lump them all together. And while the Portuguese community in my riding doesn't make up the same large percentage of the population as perhaps that of the member from Davenport, and there may not be as many Portuguese in Haldimand-Norfolk now as there have been in past years, this group contributes immensely to the community. It isn't just about the number of people, but the quality of those people and the action that those people choose. In Haldimand-Norfolk, challenges are abundant. In order for many people in my community to provide for their families, hard work is often a requirement. And it's not easy. But if you aren't afraid to get some dirt on your hands, Mr. Speaker, the opportunities are also abundant. Now, all of the Portuguese people that I know make hard work look easy, even when we know that it's not. In fact, they welcome it with open arms. And that doesn't change whether that work is working in the home or around the yard, whether it's working for an employer, or whether it's their very generous contributions as a volunteer. Not only does the Portuguese community welcome hard work, but they also welcome the other people around them. Now, I consider myself very fortunate to have good friends in our Portuguese community. In fact, whenever I visit them, they always make me feel at home. Especially, I have one very good friend who is a leader within the community, and he often takes me to visit with his friends and even with his family. And you know, Mr. Speaker, whenever I enter their homes, I'm always greeted with love and affection, just as if I were a direct member of the family. We share stories, and we share wonderful food. We laugh, and sometimes we cry from laughing so hard. And then, perhaps after too many carafes of Vino Verde or Porto, I leave feeling even more like a family member than when I arrived. Like hard work, this comes as second nature to the Portuguese community. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to call them my friends, and I'm honored to support this motion. This is a community that couldn't be more deserving of this kind of recognition. So to my Portuguese friends at home, to those in communities right across Canada, you truly are champions. You deserve this. Thank you. Obrigado.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased to rise today to indicate to the member for Davenport that we highly appreciate her motion. This is a gesture that is in the right direction. Quebec and Canada clearly have societies and communities of people from all over the world in them. Apart from the First Nations and the Inuit, we are all the children of immigrants, more or less recent immigrants. Some have been here longer than others, but it's often said that our diversity is our strength, is our wealth, but sometimes it sounds like a bit of an empty slogan, and we have to experience it. We have to have a dialogue, intercultural dialogue, these festivities and so on, and that shows us how much it's true and how lucky we are to live in peaceful, inclusive, diversified communities and a society made up of people who come from all around the world. I think we have to recognize that both as parliamentarians and as Canadians. And this initiative by the member for Davenport is a step in that direction. It's a celebration of our diversity and of one community in particular, which is very dear to me for various reasons. I'll explain some of them in the minutes ahead, in the few minutes that I have. But you have to understand that the links between Newfoundland, Quebec, and the rest of Canada, and the Portuguese community, those links go way back. Back in the 16th century, Portuguese fishermen were navigating in waters near Newfoundland. They had contact with the inhabitants of Newfoundland, and there are actually monuments in Newfoundland to this day, lest we forget those contacts and those early days, and the fact that Portuguese fishermen, their history in Newfoundland goes way back. The first immigrant from Portugal to Canada came from Lisbon. His name was Pedro. He came in 1667, Pedro da Silva, and he had 15 children. So he is responsible for quite a family name. We think that most of the Da Silvas in Quebec and in Canada today are distant descendants of Pedro da Silva, who arrived in 1667 in Canada. In Montreal, the community that I know best and I'm fortunate to represent part of, the Portuguese community is well established, but they arrived in greater numbers starting in the 1950s. That's where we saw a strong, vibrant Portuguese community begin to develop. They integrated, they worked very hard. We know that they're very hardworking, entrepreneurial people who love growing things, growing food, vegetable gardens, and so on. I'll talk a bit more about that. In Quebec, it's said that there are at least 25,000 people of Portuguese descent, most in Montreal and some in Laval in more recent times. I myself have had the opportunity to live in a neighborhood where on one side my neighbors are Chinese. Fred on the third floor is Haitian. On the second floor, they're French students from France, but there's a high turnover there. And then there's Hannibal on the other side, who's an older gentleman of Portuguese descent. And I have to thank Hannibal because he looks after the front of our house. He keeps things clean. He's there doing that every day. He always says hello. He's very friendly. The closest grocery store to my place is a block away. It's called the Sa Grocery, and it's directed by two brothers, Eddie and Minnie. My wife and I know them. One of the other brothers unfortunately died, but sometimes we're in a bit of a rush. We're not very well organized. We're doing our groceries at the last time. Sometimes we have to go 2 or 3 times on the same day to get that one last item that we forgot, bread or milk or butter or something, and they make fun of us a bit. On the other corner, there's a church, which is a very important gathering point for the Portuguese community, and it's called the Santa Cruz Church. There was a smaller one behind it, but it was too small, so now there's a bigger one. It's very colorful, it's very large, and there are often activities going on there. And in Santa Cruz Church, in the summertime, the Portuguese community conducts their traditional religious processions, and often, Mr. Speaker, the procession goes right in front of my house, so it's always great to see, and there's always great food associated with those events. And so these are the traditions of the Portuguese and the Açores and Madeira. I wanted to mention them too. But there's another important thing about the Portuguese community. They're much noisier than their religious processions. Remember the 2016 World Cup of Soccer when Portugal won the finals against France 1-0. I can tell you that I was living in the most brilliant and noisy the neighborhood in Montreal. People were out in the streets celebrating and making noise into the wee hours. They were so proud of that victory. Those are the types of things that, like, when we marvel at the diversity we live in, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. We live very near to this community, and we feel a part of it, really. And that's why I'm glad that this motion would recognize Portugal Day and Portuguese Heritage Month in June, and on June 10th specifically. And the 4th edition of the Portuguese Festival in Montreal was held this summer. Thousands of people were able to appreciate Portuguese traditions, food, dance, music, and also I hope that the International Portuguese Festival in Montreal will continue for years and years. I'm sure it will be around for a long time because we're extremely proud to have our Montreal neighbors and friends from Portugal so close. And so all this to say, Mr. Speaker, that we will proudly, very proudly, support the motion put forward by the member for Davenport and to recognize our Portuguese Canadian friends. Thank you very much.
Reprise du débat.
Resuming debate.
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Canadian Heritage.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Today, in support of motion M-126, introduced by the member from Davenport, who seeks to have this House recognize the important contributions of Canadian Portuguese that have been made to building this country and to Canadian society. The Minister of Heritage and our government are proud to support this motion. The motion seeks to acknowledge the cultural diversity of Portuguese communities in Canada and the importance of educating and reflecting upon Portuguese heritage and culture for future generations by declaring June the 10th as Portugal Day and the month of June as Portuguese Heritage Month. Our country has a long and proud tradition of opening its arms to newcomers from around the globe, Mr. Speaker. Because of this, we've become one of the most diverse countries in the world. The presence of Portuguese individuals in Canada contributes to that tremendous diversity. People from all corners of the globe choose to leave their homes, family and friends to come here, to Canada. And when they do so, they know that they will be part of a welcoming society with a strong commitment to inclusion, grounded in a proud tradition of multiculturalism. As the Parliamentary Secretary for Multiculturalism, I know personally that newcomers play a critical role in developing our cultural diversity and our economic strength, and in contributing to the vitality of our communities. In 1988, Mr. Speaker, our country became the first nation to proclaim a Multiculturalism Act, an act that requires that we preserve and enhance our multicultural heritage of all Canadians. It also requires that we work to ensure that all Canadians are equal in our economic, social, cultural, and political life. Mr. Speaker, our government is dedicated to preserving and enhancing the value of Canadian diversity and strengthening our multicultural and our pluralistic society. This commitment was clearly articulated in the speech from the throne and is referenced in our cherished Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which includes a specific provision declaring that the Charter shall be interpreted in a manner consistent with the preservation and the enhancement of the multicultural heritage of Canadians. As Canadians, we can never take this commitment to diversity and inclusion for granted. Our society has prospered and will continue to prosper thanks to the strides we have all made to ensure that Canada remains a welcoming society for people from all corners of the globe. People of different faiths, of different cultural backgrounds, who can feel proud in calling this country their home. Parliament's support for Portuguese Heritage Month and recognition of June the 10th as Portugal Day will be in line with our commitment to diversity and inclusion. Mr. Speaker, celebrating the rich diversity of our many multicultural communities is nothing new in Canada. In my riding just this past weekend, we've concluded a weekend of celebrating both the Polish and Ukrainian diasporas that exist in my riding at Parkdale High Park, communities which I'm very proud to represent here in Ottawa. Each year, celebrations such as those are held in communities across the country to honor and recognize the incredibly diverse range of communities that call this country home. On a national level, Mr. Speaker, we have celebrations like Black History Month in February and Asian Heritage Month in May, which are two significant examples of Canada's commitment to acknowledging and highlighting the vital contributions of Canada's many diverse communities to our society. By seeking to recognize the unique contributions of Canadians of Portuguese heritage, who live in my riding and ridings around this country, such as Davenport, such as ridings in Montreal, what we are doing today with this motion is continuing this quintessentially Canadian tradition of respecting and nurturing the pluralism that continues to make Canada the envy of the world. Motion M-126 presents us with another important opportunity to appreciate the commonalities that unite us, Mr. Speaker, while helping to dispel negative preconceptions that may divide us. In celebrating our diversity, we learn about our common struggles and our shared values. Portuguese Heritage Month and Portugal Day will provide an opportunity to celebrate our diversity and for Canada's Portuguese community to share its unique culture, its unique history and traditions with all Canadians. Mr. Speaker, there was a national household survey in 2011, and it indicated that approximately 430,000 people in Canada reported their ethnic origin as Portuguese. Additionally, Portuguese was the 10th most spoken non-official language in this entire country, with approximately 225,000 Canadian households reporting it as their primary mother tongue in the 2011 census. To those people, Mr. Speaker, I say, obrigado. And Mr. Speaker, those Canadians of Portuguese heritage from coast to coast to coast should feel welcomed and duly recognized through this motion brought forward by the member for Davenport. Recognition of Portuguese Heritage Month will be in keeping with the recognition already given in my home province of Ontario, with the largest population of Portuguese Canadians, which established June 10th as Portugal Day and June as Portuguese History and Heritage Month in 2001. Ontario has an act called the Celebration of Portuguese Heritage Act, which points to the long-standing presence of Portuguese in this country, which dates back over 500 years to the age of exploration and the seafaring of Portuguese navigators, such as Gaspar Corte Real, who explored the northeast coast of Terra Nova, or Newfoundland, and named Conception Bay and Portugal Cove. Government recognition will also be consistent with the fact that Portuguese heritage is also celebrated officially and unofficially throughout June in cities right across Canada. Mr. Speaker, Toronto's Little Portugal neighbourhood, just right next door to Park Delhi Park in the lovely community and constituency of Davenport, for example, is home to a thriving and vibrant community of Canadians of Portuguese heritage who come together annually to celebrate the month of June and June 10th as Portugal Day. My constituents of Portuguese and non-Portuguese descent attend that celebration to celebrate with their neighbours, but also to show their respect for the immense contributions of Portuguese to this country. Portugal Day, which falls on June 10th, is celebrated in honour of Luís de Camões, who is one of Portugal's most revered poets and author of the most famous Portuguese epic poem, the Lusíads. Portugal Day is also officially recognized as a day to celebrate Portuguese communities around the world, in recognition of the millions of people of Portuguese descent who reside outside of the homeland. With this in mind, this motion is timely given that Canada is home to one of the largest Portuguese diaspora communities in the entire world. The establishment of Portuguese Heritage Month, Mr. Speaker, will provide an opportunity for all Canadians to learn more about this tremendous community and the many notable and historic and current figures who have contributed to Canada in so many ways. Mr. Speaker, the list is immense, but to cite just a few examples, individuals such as the world-famous singer Nelly Furtado, and no, I will not do a rendition, Mr. Speaker. People said, thank you for acknowledging that, Mr. Speaker. People like Canadian Olympic medalist Megan Benfito and the Honourable Maria Linares de Souza, who is the judge of the Superior Court of Justice in Ontario, among many, many others. Celebrations such as Portuguese Heritage Month are an expression of the vitality of our multiculturalism, which I started out referencing, Mr. Speaker. Our hope is that Canadians of all backgrounds will view Portuguese Heritage Month as an opportunity to learn about Portuguese culture while celebrating our inclusive sense of Canadian identity. I want to conclude, Mr. Speaker, by reiterating our government's support for this motion, our government's support for the efforts being made by the member from Davenport, and highlighting that it is essential that Canadians celebrate and acknowledge the various communities that have helped to make Canada one of the most successful multicultural countries in the world. With this in mind, Mr. Speaker, I would urge all members of this House to vote in favour of motion M-126. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Obrigado.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Brampton South.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise today in support of M-126. I rise in support of the groups of talented and dedicated Portuguese Canadians in my riding of Brampton South. I rise in support of the talented and dedicated Portuguese Canadians across the country. It is important to recognize those who worked hard to help built this country and whose hard work continues to shape and define our communities from coast to coast. In Brampton South, we have a very special group, Amigos Portuguese do Peel, who dedicate their time, energy, and talent to supporting community projects throughout Peel. Under passionate and compassionate community leadership, the Amigos Portuguese have made their work on Peel region and in Brampton South. They have been working hard over the past 4 years, organizing fundraiser events, dances, golf tournament, bocce tournament, and more to support redevelopment of Peel Memorial. Mr. Speaker, in my first speech in this place, I spoke of the Amigos Portuguese and their fundraising efforts where once again they exceeded their goals. It is clear to me and to anyone who works with this group that they are dedicated and hardworking and are eager to make a difference in our communities. We should all be so fortunate to have groups like Amigos Portuguese in our ridings and so for many other groups in cross country. Their hard work is literally shaping our community. Across Canada and around the world, in businesses, in sports, in media, in community building, and the Portuguese community is thriving. In Canada, we know that diversity is our strength, and we can do more when we came together as one family. The Portuguese Canadian members of this family have shared their diversity, their culture, and their custard tarts with us, and we are forever grateful. As we know, Mr. Speaker, the GTA saw a major moment of Portuguese immigration in 1955. Most of the Portuguese people coming to Canada to help fill labor needs. That time, keeping up with the post-World War II development boom, Portuguese families settled into their new home and helped rebuild cities. From those early days to right now, we have a lot to thank our Portuguese Canadians for. I support this motion because, Mr. Speaker, I feel that this is the vitality important to recognize and celebrate the various communities who have come together to make the Canadian mosaic. During the summer, I had the chance to visit Ponta Delgada on São Miguel Island on the Azores. I toured the beautiful landscapes and learned about the community. I was happy to see this beautiful place where many residents of Brampton South trace their heritage. In my riding, I'm proud that we are home to the Church of Our Lady of Fatima, which hosts the annual Santo Cristo procession and the Holy Ghost festivities. Both of these celebrations are among the largest in Ontario and bring Portuguese Canadians from across the province and beyond to join in. In June, I joined my colleagues in Brampton, along the members of the city government, to raise the Portuguese flag at Brampton City Hall. It was an honor to join my colleagues and honor this important community in Brampton. Later that day, everyone was invited to Garden Square in downtown Brampton and right beside my office for a Portuguese festival, which celebrated the unique heritage of this community. There was live music, food festival, traditional dancing, and many crafts. It was a wonderful day, Mr. Speaker, and I look forward to continue these celebrations in years to come. On that day, in fact, for the first time, June was proclaimed as Portuguese Heritage Month in the city of Brampton. I hope that we can share this celebration across Canada with the adoption of the motion. By marking Portuguese Heritage Month as this motion would do, we are entrenching in Canadian culture the importance of recognizing the history and tradition of so many of our neighbors and friends. I'm proud to have a great community partners in Regional Councillor Martin Medeiros, who joined me in engaging the Portuguese community. Councillor Medeiros is a tireless, and I'm grateful for the work he does to recognize Portuguese Canadians at the regional level in Brampton and Peel. We have had important celebration here in Ottawa too. Last spring, Mr. Speaker, the Canada and Portugal Friendship Group hosted a parliamentary celebration of Portugal Day. We had visitors from Brampton South, a whole bus, as well as many other communities in the GTA with large Portuguese Canadian populations. The festivities that day were celebrated with joy. We had music, food, and friends, the best kind of celebration. And this is how we should always celebrate our diversity. We share our histories, we share our culture, we share our values. One of the traditional dances of Portugal is a fandango, a competition to see who has the lightest on their feet while engaging each other in fun and exciting dance. I encourage all members here to join their Portuguese community and learn the fandango. As a member of the Canada-Portugal Friendship Group, I want to make a moment and thank my colleague, the chair of the group, for the chairs of the group for the work they do in organizing special events to celebrate Portuguese heritage. They have worked tirelessly as the leaders of our group, and I would be remiss not to thank them for their work. To paraphrase as often repeated line, together better is always possible. We are always better together. Mr. Speaker, I want to commend my colleague, the member of Davenport, for bringing this motion forward and recognizing the wonderful contribution Portuguese Canadians have made, and will they surely continue to make to Canada better. It speaks great volumes of her dedication to representing her community. She is a hard worker and to community celebrating the diversity to all Canadians to bring forward such a motion of this place. I encourage my colleague to join me, all colleagues to join me in supporting this motion and in supporting the celebration of Portuguese heritage this year and every year going forward. Obrigado, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for, the honourable parliamentary secretary to the government house leader.
Mr. Speaker, and maybe an appropriate way to start, because I was so impressed by my colleague and friend, the member from Davenport. Listening to her speech, you get this appreciation of just how much passion she has for our Portuguese community. I know this isn't the first time I've heard her stand in the House or even beyond the House, whether it's in caucus or in the lobby. You get this sense that there's an immense amount of pride and joy that she has embodied that deals with our Portuguese Canadian heritage group. So I applaud her for her actions today in ensuring that what we're doing is we're looking at one of our treasured communities in Canada and recognizing the value of having a heritage period of time, a month and a week, recognized in the month of June, because I think that is something that is long overdue, Mr. Speaker, and I applaud her and those around, because no doubt, as members often will bring resolutions and ideas such as this to the floor of the House of Commons, quite often those ideas are supported from the grassroots people within our communities, and those that work so hard through ethnic type of cultural events that take place in every region of our country. So I also recognize, as I know my colleague from Davenport has already mentioned many of those, even by name she knows it so thoroughly, but I think just generally speaking, all those that were involved in helping and assisting us having this great discussion and debate today and recognizing a very important community. Our Prime Minister often talks about Canada's greatest strength, that greatest strength being our diversity. And there is no, now I'm a little bit biased, I'll admit that up front, there is no greater demonstration of our diversity, I would argue, than in Winnipeg during the month of August. And I know I have my colleague, the member from Winnipeg South, and my colleague from Winnipeg Centre that is with me, and in fact, in sharing our sense of pride in our Portuguese community. In fact, the member from Winnipeg North Centre actually has at least 2 Portuguese centres of activities located in Winnipeg Centre. And I know he's as I have, and other members of the Manitoba Caucus have taken a great deal of pride in enjoying that wonderful Portuguese hospitality. And, you know, if I go to what it is when we listen to our Prime Minister talk about that strength, I think that it's interesting for us to really get that appreciation. Some members have made reference to what other countries and how other countries are thinking, at least in part. Not all other countries, but there are some countries that raise concerns that maybe do not recognize the true value of multiculturalism or immigration and how society benefits by that, how Canada has benefited, Mr. Speaker. And we can see that. You can get a snapshot of that by looking at our Portuguese community. You know, my colleague from Davenport made reference to good, solid, quality jobs such as construction. You know, and I hate to think in terms of what kind of construction we would have missed in the city of Winnipeg if we didn't have such strong, hard-working personalities in that particular community. In fact, if you take a look at the Portuguese Centre that's on Notre Dame, it is a beautiful centre, Mr. Speaker. And I know that there's individuals like Mario Santos and so many others that actually made it happen. And you want to talk about commitment. You know, nowadays you'll often get groups that will go to governments of different levels and say, well, how can we get this centre built? We had, and I encourage governments to get involved where they can, having said that, but we had this community centre built a number of decades ago. And what we saw was members of the Portuguese community come to the table and say, hey, look, let's get the land, let's get the supplies, and they were in firsthand building the centre. And if you have never seen the centre, I would really encourage you, if you go to Winnipeg, to go and check out the Portuguese Centre. In fact, when I meet with members of communities of Filipino heritage and the Ethiopian heritage members, I've often made reference to the Portuguese Centre as an ideal type of centre, and even the manner in which it came into being. Now, recommending members to go to the Portuguese Centre, let me make a suggestion as to when you should go to the Portuguese Centre. If you really want to get a taste of Portugal and of Portuguese pride, I would recommend that you go during Folclorama. Because if you go during Folclorama, you will see that facility, that particular facility, and as I say, there's more than one facility, where it really comes alive. In a very tangible way. We will see thousands of people, not only from Winnipeg, from the United States, other parts of Canada, that will come during that month of August to participate in Canada's greatest multicultural show, and many of them will, in fact, visit the Portuguese pavilion. And when you walk into this particular pavilion, you have a choice. You can start off by going into the basement, and you'll see the heritage clothing that is often worn. You will see their emphasis on football, soccer. Depends what one might want to call it. It is a passion. I do know that much, Mr. Speaker. But it is something in which you go downstairs and you see this wonderful display of all sorts of things that get you thinking about traveling to Portugal. Then if you stay and you go into the main auditorium, you will be treated with some fantastic food. Some of my colleagues have talked about good food. Well, you go there during Folklorama, and those desserts are awfully hard to say no to, let alone some of the other products that you will eat, Mr. Speaker. And I tell you, the hospitality is incredible. Well, while you're eating or you just want to be there for the entertainment, you will see some fantastic dancing take place. Whether it's young people or not as young people in circles, and you have to excuse me for not necessarily knowing the actual name of the dance, but I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, it is a real treat. And that's just one aspect in terms of our Portuguese community. I could talk to you about a community in rural Manitoba where you have the Portuguese community that are camped around and own property. It is quite the community. We can talk about both pavilions. Not only do we have one pavilion, there's actually two pavilions. Both of them are first class. I realize my time has expired. I always appreciate, Mr. Speaker, to be able to share a few words.
When this motion returns, the honourable member will have 2 minutes credit to his side. Time provided for the consideration of private members' business has now expired, and the order is drawn.